you so much for having me. Can everyone hear me in the back? Are you okay? I don't need a mic or anything. All right. It's very fortuitous. First of all, thank you so much for inviting me, SLAT students. I'm really excited to be here and talk to you about different projects that we've been working on in different stages. But also, it just so happens my very, very first conference as a master's student was a poster at the SLAT Roundtable, the year Claudia Coast was president. So it's a very neat year. This is the first year, of course, the award is being given in her honor, and so I'm really, really excited to be here this particular year. Also, Lynn Hua was the dissertation director of my master's advisor, and so there's a lot of neat connections with the SLAT Roundtable. So this was a really fun invitation for me. So thank you so much. So what I'm going to talk about today, Beyond Four Walls, Can Digital Games Really Change the World? I sort of stole that title, and I'll talk about it in a minute. But let me point out, I don't have handouts today, but you can email me. You can have a copy of this whole presentation. Also, I didn't include references for lots of visual reasons, but you're more than welcome. I'm happy to send you a list of references and actual academic writing that is related to each of these topics. We're really going to look at sort of the big picture and framing what's happening in this sort of emerging field of what's going on, and that's the goal today. Really, the beginning part, Beyond Four Walls, comes from the idea that language learning has to happen outside of the classroom the same way that it happens inside of the classroom, if not more so, right? The idea is we want our students, yes, to enjoy their classroom experience and engage in what's going on, communicative language teaching, all of those things we talk about, but most importantly, we want them to go out into the world and actually use language. And gaming is a way to do that. And I'm going to show you 3 different sort of examples of the way that our idea is to move language learning pedagogy away from this typical textbook idea that language is separated from the communities in which it is spoken. And so these are some different projects looking at that. Where did it come from? Some of you may have seen this TED Talk. How many have actually seen Jane McGonigal's talk? It's a great talk. You might think it's awfully idealistic. If you haven't seen it, it's about 20 minutes. You can look. She basically says her title is Video Games Can Save the World. She works for the Institute of the Future, and her premise is that by gaming and by engaging people with games, you can solve problems like world hunger, like crashing economies, major big picture problems. And what she's saying is, the reason that you can do this is the type of person who games and the type of person who's successful, especially in multiplayer games, is what she calls the super empowered, hopeful individuals. I love this name, super empowered, hopeful individuals. What does it mean? Anyone know what it means? Well, those of you who have seen the talk, of course, do. But the idea is these people have 4 specific characteristics about the way they see the world based on the activities that they do while they're gaming. And to me, these fit very closely with what we talk about when we talk about our ideal language learner, right? We would love it if we had super empowered, hopeful language learners, right? Who believed that they could go into the world and actually do something with their language. Unlike in my context, where I teach Spanish, supervise about 3,000 students each semester, most of which take 1 semester of Spanish and decide that's it, right? I pass my language credit, I'm out of here. And it's always our goal to keep them moving on and keep them moving forward. So what does urgent optimism mean? Basically the idea that there's always a belief in an epic win. That's what she says. And an epic win is basically, at the end, this far-reaching goal that you have to work really, really hard to get. And there's always a belief that you can accomplish it. The same thing with language learners, right? The idea that they can actually become advanced level, competent language speakers. How many people have sat on an airplane, someone asks you what they do? Oh, I took that language in college, but I can't really do anything with it, right? How many of us have had that experience? Oh, you teach this? Oh, I wish I could do that. But the idea instead being, oh, I can learn language, this is what I do, these are the types of activities, and that's sort of the mentality we're going for. Also, a tight social fabric. The idea that by working with people, we can actually get somewhere. And we're better at getting along with people. In most massively multiplayer online games, you have to collaborate with other people in order to get anywhere. What does that mean? If you don't know how to use pragmatics correctly, right, how to be polite, how to persuade, how to do different things, you can't do anything. The same thing with language, where we actually believe that getting along with people and intercultural communication is a very important goal. Those of us in this room, of course, believe that. But how do we get our students engaged in that idea? Also, blissful productivity. Basically, the idea that working hard is more fun than relaxing, right? The idea that sitting down to work on my vocabulary words, sitting down to actually study language is something that truly encapsulates me and something I enjoy doing. We've all had this experience, right, where all of a sudden we're working really, really hard on something, super proud of the product, we look up and we're, oh my gosh, 10 hours have just passed. How did that happen to me? Wouldn't it be great if our language learners did that instead of sitting with their flashcards on the bus? How fast can I get through these? And that's sort of the intentioned purpose of what we're doing. And finally, epic meaning. Basically, the idea that things can actually mean something in the world. Language learning has a purpose. It's not a matter of passing a class, it's a matter of doing something with it. And she works on these problems at a much more global scale. She works on them. But I thought there were really interesting characteristics of what we wish language learners were like and what our ultimate goal is and what we're working towards. So what does all of this really have to do with language learning? Why digital games, right? What we know, and this comes from some work that I've done with Steve Thorne, John Reinhardt in this room, basically the idea that because the world is shifting around us, we need to also be proactive and responsive to that shift. Steve and John have done a lot of work looking at literacies and advanced level language learning and bridging sort of vernacular speech, vernacular talk, vernacular games with these sort of high level academic genres. And learners actually need to do both. And that's what's really, really important. They need to know how to write a formal academic paper, how to give a conference presentation, absolutely. But they also need to know how to collaborate with people and make friends and understand the cultural products around them, of which games are one of them. Also, as we look forward, we have to rethink the idea of this as a digital gamer, right? How many of you, when I say games, video games, you think of this immediately, right? You can be honest, it's okay. Oh, some people aren't answering. Or you knew what you were getting into today. But the idea that it's sort of these teenage boys alone in their room, that it's an anti-social activity, that it's a waste of time, is exactly opposite to what we're seeing in the language that's being used, in the types of people who are very, very successful gamers. Some of them work for President Obama and his cabinet, for example, right? You have to actually be very, very good socially to be good at a lot of these different types of games. And so we have to sort of shift our thinking. At least if you could do it for me for the next 45 minutes, I'd really appreciate it. When you leave, you can decide however you want to feel about it. So what do we know? What makes games so interesting? One, the idea of engagement. McGonigal, of course, calls it blissful productivity. But the idea that you're so entranced with whatever's going on, whether it's hard work or not. Games aren't sort of just this idea of being really, really fun. Right? They are fun, actually. If you haven't played them, they are a lot of fun in most cases. But they also are really frustrating. They're really hard. They require a lot of patience. At least the good games do. Also, skills, strategies, and behaviors. And this is what's so interesting for me in thinking about language learning pedagogy. One, intense problem solving. We talk a lot about task-based learning, for example. We talk about sort of this end goal of what our learners need to be able to do. But what are we really asking them in terms of problem solving? What kind of real-world language problems do you want to solve, right? Saying, okay, I want you to pretend you're the doctor and I want you to pretend that you're the patient and exchange symptoms and remedies. Right? What if our students aren't going to be doctors, right? Maybe we can actually give them sort of real-world problems, and that's sort of the goal of what we're working on. Also, strategic thinking, so some meta-linguistic skills, right? The idea we can actually build skills that we say we build abroad, which absolutely happens in many study abroad contexts, but the idea that, what do I do when I don't know a word? Right? We talk a lot about that, but our students actually don't know as well as we'd like them to know. And games are a really great context to make that happen and give us some really neat ideas for pedagogy as well. And also persuasive discourse. I happen to be most interested in pragmatics. That's why I got into gaming. I was not a gamer until I started the second year of my PhD program. And I started looking at all the problems with teaching pragmatics that we have, right? Variable behaviors. Each person has their own personality, their perception of the world. Looking at how you teach a teenage boy to date and to pick up on a girl in 5 different Spanish-speaking countries. I have no idea how to do that, right? But that's really, really important to them. And so games are a really nice way to build in all of that and to get students engaged with pragmatic behaviors that allow them to actually have to analyze language in interesting ways. They actually have to look at strategies and make decisions about what they're going to do or not do, and change that based on the people that they're talking to. And then finally, experimentation. My favorite example, and we've talked about, I've actually written about this on the Games to Teach blog, but in Super Mario Brothers, has anyone played Super Mario Brothers? Lots of people, right? You're not gamers, but you play Super Mario Brothers. There's a thing called the super jump. What happens in the super jump? Anyone know? It's super hard because you have to slide your finger over to make this really, really big jump. And it's a lot of the time the only way you can get bonuses or do really interesting things. What's great about Super Mario Brothers is they let you try as many times as you'd like in a very low risk situation. You never die, 10 times or 20 times. And then you get to a high risk situation where you better know how to do that super jump. But you've already been taught and given all of this chance for experimentation and trying things out. The same is true of feedback. And if we think about what we traditionally do in a foreign language classroom especially, right? We have a chapter. We teach the content of the chapter, we have our learning outcomes, and at the end, yeah, we give them some practice and we give them context one day maybe, and then we test them on it, right? We have a chapter exam, we have an end of semester exam, where there's very little chance for this type of experimentation, right? Super low risk, no feedback from me as an instructor, or feedback that actually means something. And so that's the idea of games that's really interesting, is it's actually built in as part of the pedagogy, not as sort of a separate assessment piece. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that as well. And as we move forward, really there are two key questions that I want to address in these. I don't know about digital games. I don't think games actually change anything. But I do think the people playing them do. And I know language learning can change the world. Absolutely. I have no doubt about that. So that's what I'm most interested in. And so the questions that I want to talk about are, one, where are we in terms of digital games and L2 teaching and learning now? Kind of what do we know, which isn't a lot. So the caveat is there, not a lot. And where do I sort of see us going in the future in terms of a research agenda, in terms of the things that are really, really important? So the first project, and this is my first attempt at working with games and pragmatics. Again, as I said, I saw all these things pragmatics couldn't do and all these things games could do, and I said, well, let's see if we can put them together and actually do pragmatics instruction well. I can tell you, I started with knowing what I know now, I started with the craziest project in actually building a space from scratch as a game designer. Would I do it again? Probably not. You know, the more you realize you don't know. That's this project. But what was really great is I saw sort of the complexities in building a space and starting from scratch. I want to show you the trailer because I always promised my student who created this that I would, and I'll explain why in a minute.